Your grandfather survived a winter without the power grid, without a heated house, without a single thing from a hardware store that cost more than a few cents. You couldn't survive a long weekend. That's not an insult. It's just what happened when the knowledge stopped getting passed down. The generation that lived through the Second World War knew how to keep a room warm with 3 candles and a clay pot. They knew how to make stored food last a winter with no freezer, and how to turn a cellar into a refrigerator that ran on nothing. And then they died, and most of it died with them because nobody wrote it down where you'd find it. What you got instead was a contractor who charges $400 to do what your grandmother did with a $2 bag of powder. A utility company that profits the more you waste. A heating bill in January that would have made the wartime generation laugh because they heated a whole room for the price of a candle. This is not nostalgia. Every skill in this video is something you can do this week with materials under $5 that the war generation treated as ordinary. Welcome to the Survival Research. If you are not subscribed yet, hit subscribe and the bell. This is where we dig up what the comfort industry buried. Let me start with the one most people get wrong: heat. In the winter of 1940, families in London spent every night in a steel shelter buried in the garden. No electricity, no furnace, temperatures below freezing. They survived because of one principle the heating industry will never advertise. You do not heat a house, you heat a person. A modern furnace dumps energy into the walls, the ceiling, the air in rooms nobody is sitting in. The wartime generation heated the smallest space that held a body, a single room, sometimes a single chair. The candle and clay pot method is real, documented in the shelters of 1940. A few candles under an inverted terracotta pot. The clay absorbs the flame's heat and radiates it slowly, turning a flickering candle into a steady, warm surface. It will not heat a house. It was never meant to. It takes the edge off a small enclosed space exactly the way it did in a buried shelter 80 years ago. Stop for 1 second, because I need to tell you where the rest of this goes. There are 25 of these skills: heat from a candle, a refrigerator with no power, bread that lasts a month, flour that never gets infested. I documented every one of them with the exact method, the exact cost, and the exact reason it stopped being taught. It is all in the suppressed file, the file the comfort industry hates, step by step. Scan the QR code on your screen or hit the first link in the description and get it now. Let me keep going. The second skill is the one that turns a basement into a machine, the root cellar. Before the refrigerator was in every kitchen, the war generation stored a winter's worth of food in a hole in the ground. The science is simple and it has not changed. Below the frost line, the earth holds a steady temperature near 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year. Cold enough to slow rot, stable enough to never freeze. Carrots packed in damp sand, apples wrapped so one rotting fruit cannot touch the next. Potatoes in the dark so they do not turn green. Onions hung in a braid where the air could move around them. Each food has its own corner, its own temperature, its own enemy. The war generation knew them all by heart. A properly built root cellar kept a family fed through a hard winter with no power and no cost. Your refrigerator does the same job and adds it to your electric bill every month for the rest of your life. Still watching? Then you already understand more about real self-reliance than almost everyone you know. Most people would not last a week if the grid blinked. You are learning the file the comfort industry hates. Scan the QR code on your screen or hit the first link in the description and get it now. Now stay with me, because the next ones are the cheapest and the most useful. The third skill is preserving food without a freezer. During the war, home canning hit its peak. In 1943 alone, American families put up over 4 billion jars of food at home. But canning needed sugar and metal, both rationed. So the smart ones dried instead. Drying needs no sugar, no rubber seal, no rationed metal. Corn was dried because it kept its flavor and resisted canning anyway. Beans, apples, herbs, peppers, all laid out and dried until no moisture remained for mold to grow in. A dried bean stores for years in a paper bag. The fourth skill solves a problem you have right now in your pantry. Weevils, the little beetles that hatch in flour and grain. The war generation knew the trick, and it costs nothing. Put your flour in the freezer for 2 weeks before you store it. The cold kills the eggs before they ever hatch. Then it sits on a shelf for a year and nothing crawls out. The fifth skill is light without giving yourself away. In the blackout, any light at night could guide a bomber. So a night candle went under a clay flower pot with a small gap, throwing just enough glow to see by and nothing more. The same principle keeps a candle from being a fire hazard and makes one small flame light a whole corner. The sixth skill is the refuge room. The government literally printed a booklet telling families to pick one room, seal the drafts, and live in it. One room is cheaper to heat, faster to warm, and easier to defend against the cold than a whole house. Close the doors, block the gap under them with a rolled towel. Cover the window at night. You have just cut your heated space by 80% and your fuel need with it. The seventh skill is layering, and everyone does it wrong. You do not put on one thick sweater. You put on 3 thin layers because the trapped air between them is the actual insulation. Air, not fabric, keeps you warm. The eighth skill is the hot water bottle, the original personal heater. Hot water in a sealed container, wrapped in cloth, against the body or in the bed. It costs the price of boiling water and holds heat for hours. The ninth skill is the warm drink as a tool, not a comfort. A hot drink raises core temperature and keeps circulation moving in a cold room. The war generation in the underground carried flasks of hot tea for exactly this reason. The 10th skill is condensation control. Morrison Shelters ran with water on the floor every night from breath and body heat. Families built wooden slat racks to keep their feet off the wet ground, because wet means cold and cold means sick. The 11th skill is foraging the things that grow for free. Dandelion greens, lamb's quarters, wild berries, all gathered and eaten or preserved during the war to stretch the ration. They are still growing in the same ditches today, and they are still free. The 12th skill is zero waste cooking. Every scrap used, bones into stock, stale bread into pudding, vegetable ends into soup, nothing thrown out, because throwing food out was throwing survival out. The 13th skill is make do and mend. The government ran a national campaign teaching people to repair clothing instead of replacing it. A patched coat is warmth that costs a needle and thread instead of $200. The 14th skill is the community canning center. Families pooled equipment because pressure canners were nearly impossible to buy during the war. The lesson is that survival was shared, and a shared tool fed more people for less. The 15th skill is sanitation in a sealed space. A chamber bucket kept a buried shelter livable through a long night. Sanitation is the skill nobody wants to talk about, and the first one that kills you when it fails. The 16th skill is moving water out of a flooded space, the way one father rigged a hand pump to keep his family's shelter dry. The 17th skill is the emergency exit. Every Morrison shelter had a removable panel at the far end, so a family buried by debris could dig out the other way. 2 ways out of any space you depend on, always. The 18th skill is the earth blanket. The shelters were covered in a thick layer of soil because dirt stops blast, stops shrapnel, and holds temperature better than any thin wall. The 19th skill is reading the harvest, knowing what to dry, what to store cold, and what to eat first, because some foods last and some rot in a week. The 20th skill is the victory garden. At its peak, home gardens grew a huge share of America's vegetables in backyards, on rooftops, and empty lots. Food you grow cannot be rationed away from you. The 21st skill is seed saving. You let a few of your best plants go to seed, dry them, and store them, so this year's garden pays for next year's with nothing bought. A packet of seeds at the store is selling you something the plant gives away for free. The 22nd skill is the cold frame, a simple box with a glass or clear lid that traps sun and extends the growing season into the cold months for free. Greens in winter with no greenhouse and no heat. The 23rd skill is animal keeping, the rabbits and chickens families raised in cities and backyards to add protein the ration could not. A few hens turn kitchen scraps into eggs every morning. The 24th skill is rendering and storing fat, because fat was calories and calories were survival. Saved cooking fat became cooking fuel, soap, and energy that did not spoil. And the 25th skill is the one that ties them together, knowing which skill to reach for first. The war generation did not panic because they had a sequence. Warmth first, then water, then food, then everything else. Now let me be honest about what this is and what it is not. These are not replacements for a doctor, an electrician, or a structural engineer. The candle and pot will not heat your house and was never meant to. A root cellar will not replace a freezer for everything. What these skills replace is the helplessness, the assumption that you cannot keep yourself warm, fed, and dry without a company sending you a bill. The war generation did all of this with less than you throw away in a week. They were not preppers. They were not survivalists. They were ordinary people who simply had not yet forgotten. They did not buy a single gadget to do any of this. They did not download an app or sign a contract or wait for a delivery. They looked at what they had, remembered what they were taught, and got to work. That is the real skill underneath all 25. Not the candle, not the cellar, not the dried bean. The refusal to be helpless. You have a choice now. You can keep paying a contractor for what costs $1, keep paying a utility for what a candle and a clay pot did for free, keep assuming that comfort is something you buy and not something you make. Or you can do what your grandfather did and never thought twice about, the same way he did it, with the same things he had, for the same few cents. The knowledge did not die. It was waiting for someone to dig it back up. If this video brought something back, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember what we were made to forget. The information was always there. Now you have it.